Ibuka grew up in a small compound in Anambra, where dreams were often crushed before they even began. He was the quiet one in the Okafor family, the boy who preferred to fix broken radios instead of joining others in farm work. His father, Mr. Okafor, never hid his disappointment. Every time he looked at Ibuka, he sighed and said, "Why can't you be more like your brother Chima?" Chima was everything the family bragged about, a university graduate, working in Lagos, sending money home. But Ibuka had different dreams. He wanted to build something of his own, to create a life where he didn't have to beg anyone to believe in him. Whenever he talked about opening a small phone repair shop, the family laughed. "You think dreams feed people?" his uncle once said, shaking his head. His mother would look at him with tired eyes and mutter, "Ibuka, you'll never be anything in life if you keep dreaming instead of working." Those words stayed in his chest like stones. Every insult, every comparison, every cold silence after family dinners reminded him that he didn't belong. But inside, Ibuka carried something they couldn't see, a quiet fire. Each time his father praised Chima, he promised himself he would never let that pain define him. When others slept, he stayed awake watching YouTube tutorials on phone repairs, using an old phone that barely charged. His siblings mocked him for wasting time, but he didn't stop. He wasn't just chasing a dream. He was trying to prove that his life had meaning. One evening, after his father shouted again that he was useless, Ibuka went outside and sat under the mango tree. The sky was dark, but his mind was clear. He whispered to himself, "One day they'll remember my name." That night, while the rest of the house slept, he took a piece of paper and wrote his promise down. "I will make something out of nothing." He folded it and kept it in his pocket like a secret weapon, a reminder that even if no one believed in him, he would believe in himself louder than all their doubts combined. Ibuka decided he couldn't keep waiting for anyone to believe in him. With a small bag of borrowed tools from a friend, he set up a corner under a kiosk in town and began repairing mobile phones. He didn't even have a table at first. He used an old wooden crate as his workspace. Each day he cleaned broken phones, hoping someone would trust him with a real job. But when his siblings passed by, they laughed. "Look at you, Ibuka," his sister sneered. "Still playing with wires instead of getting a real job." Their laughter burned more than the sun on his neck. Still, he smiled and kept working, pretending not to hear. Days turned into weeks, and he barely earned enough to buy food. Sometimes he fixed a phone perfectly and still got paid half because people thought he didn't deserve full payment. One afternoon, while returning home tired and dusty, he heard his uncle speaking loudly to visitors in the compound. "That boy is a waste of space," his uncle said. "He'll never make it. Just look at him, chasing rubbish dreams." Ibuka froze behind the wall, his hands trembling. It wasn't just the words, it was the laughter that followed. Even his mother didn't defend him. That night, as the house grew quiet, Ibuka sat on his bed staring at the few tools he owned. His chest felt heavy, like something inside him had broken for good. He realized that no matter what he did, they would never see him differently. The next morning before sunrise, he quietly packed his bag, a few shirts, his tools, and his notebook. He looked around one last time, knowing no one would even notice he was gone. As he stepped out of the gate, the cold air hit his face, but for the first time, he felt free. Standing on the empty road, he whispered to himself, "If I fail out there, at least I failed trying." It wasn't anger that pushed him, it was hunger. Hunger to prove that he was more than their laughter, more than their words. With nothing but courage and a dream, Ibuka began the hardest journey of his life. Life outside home was harder than Ibuka imagined. He stayed in his friend Uche's small phone shop, sleeping on a wooden bench after closing hours. The floor was cold, the air smelled of dust and wires, but he was grateful to have a roof at all. Every morning, he swept the shop, cleaned tools, and helped Uche fix broken phones. At first, most customers ignored him, thinking he was just an apprentice. But when one woman noticed how carefully he handled her phone and how honest he was about the price, she told others. Slowly, people started saying, "Go to that quiet boy, he won't cheat you." Even though he worked long hours, Ibuka earned just enough to survive. Some days, he went to bed hungry, saving every naira he could. He often pretended he wasn't hungry so Uche wouldn't notice. When other boys were buying snacks or new shirts, Ibuka spent his money on screwdrivers and tiny spare parts. At night, after everyone slept, he used his old cracked phone to watch YouTube videos about electronics and business. The screen flickered, the data finished fast, but he kept going. He wanted to understand not just how to fix phones, but how to build a future. There were days he felt invisible, walking past people who once called him failure. Some laughed when they saw him carrying his old toolbox through the market. "So this is your big dream?" they'd say. Ibuka would smile and keep walking. He knew replying wasn't worth it. Every insult became another spark that fueled his drive. One quiet night, after a long day of work, he sat on the bench holding his notebook. The sound of rain on the roof filled the silence. His stomach was empty, but his heart was full of fire. He wrote with shaky hands. "They said I'd never be anything. I'll make anything worth remembering." He closed the notebook gently and whispered a prayer. In that moment, under the flickering light of the shop, Ibuka made a silent promise to himself that one day, the same people who doubted him would line up just to shake his hand. One afternoon, while Ibuka was fixing a phone in Uche's shop, a regular customer named Mama Ifeoma came in. She had always admired his patience and honesty. That day, she watched him work quietly and said, "My brother's friend runs a small phone business. He needs someone who can repair in bulk. I'll tell him about you." Ibuka thanked her but didn't think much of it. A few days later, a man called from Enugu, offering him a chance to repair 50 used phones for resale. It felt like a miracle. Ibuka borrowed transport money and carried his tools in a nylon bag, whispering, "God, let this be my break." When he arrived, the man tested him with one phone. Ibuka fixed it perfectly within minutes. Impressed, the man gave him the entire batch. Ibuka worked day and night for a week, refusing to rest until every phone worked like new. When the man returned and saw the results, he smiled and handed Ibuka an envelope full of cash. It was more money than Ibuka had ever seen in his life. His hands trembled as he counted it, not just because of the amount, but because it was proof that his hard work was finally paying off. Instead of wasting the money, Ibuka bought better tools, a small table, and painted a wooden sign that read, "eConnect Repairs." He rented a corner near the main market and opened his own tiny workshop. People were drawn to his humility and skill. He fixed phones others had given up on, and word began to spread. "There's a young man who can fix anything." Soon, boys from the streets started coming to him, asking to learn. Ibuka saw himself in their tired faces, boys no one believed in. So he taught them, sharing every lesson he'd learned the hard way. The small shop became a family of dreamers. Customers lined up daily, some even from nearby towns. For the first time, Ibuka felt like his name meant something. He no longer chased opportunities. They came looking for him. What started under a borrowed kiosk had now become a growing business, and a spark of hope that refused to die. Ibuka woke up one morning to a phone call that made his heart skip a beat. A journalist from a local newspaper had heard about his small workshop, eConnect Repairs, and wanted to write a story about him. Nervous but proud, Ibuka agreed. The next day, the reporter watched him work, taking notes as he repaired phones with care, trained boys who once had no hope, and spoke with customers politely. A few days later, the article was published. The headline read, "The Young Man Who Fixes Anything, From Rejection to Resilience." His phone didn't stop ringing. Orders started flooding in. People from across the city came to his tiny workshop, drawn by the story and his growing reputation for honesty. Even small companies began calling him to repair bulk gadgets, amazed that a young man, once called useless, could deliver so efficiently. Ibuka realized it was time to move. He rented a small shop closer to the main road, painted a bright signboard with eConnect Repairs, and hung his tools neatly. The place felt official for the first time, a real reflection of all his effort and dreams. Every day, customers lined up outside the shop. People he didn't know brought phones, laptops and tablets, asking him to fix what others had failed to repair. Ibuka never refused anyone, even when he was tired or the money was small. One afternoon, he noticed a group of street kids watching him from a corner. Without hesitation, he invited them inside and offered to repair their old phones for free. A passerby snapped a photo, capturing Ibuka bending down to fix a cracked screen with a smile. Within hours, the photo went viral online. People started sharing it, calling him the boy they rejected. For the first time, Ibuka felt the weight of recognition. The same city that once ignored him was now cheering him on. He wasn't just fixing phones anymore. He was fixing perceptions, showing that talent, hard work, and kindness could turn rejection into triumph. As he closed the shop that evening, counting the day's earnings and watching his students leave with smiles, Ibuka whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning. They laughed at me, but now they'll remember my name." The small shop had become a symbol, not just of success, but of persistence, hope, and the first real victory in a life that had once seemed invisible. Ibuka's life changed one rainy afternoon when he received a call from a tech company in Lagos. They had seen the viral article and wanted to discuss a partnership. At first, Ibuka could hardly believe it. A major company reaching out to him? The same boy they once called useless? He traveled to Lagos, carrying nothing but a notebook filled with ideas and a determination that had been growing for years. The meeting went beyond expectations. The company was impressed by his skill, his honesty, and the small training program he had already started informally with street boys. Ibuka proposed something bold, a structured training program for unemployed youth, teaching them how to repair phones, tablets, and gadgets, while also giving them business skills to start their own ventures. The company loved the idea and agreed to fund it alongside him. Word spread quickly, and soon government officials visited the program to see how it worked. They were impressed and decided to provide grants to expand it further. Within months, Ibuka found himself managing multiple training centers across different states, mentoring hundreds of young men and women who had been told they were failures, just like he once was. Despite the attention and success, Ibuka never forgot the harsh words from his family and neighbors. Every time someone mentioned his past, he didn't feel anger. He felt gratitude that those moments had pushed him to work harder. Even people who had mocked him now spoke his name with respect. Small towns, markets, and online forums buzzed with stories about the boy they rejected, who had turned his dreams into a reality. As his program grew, Ibuka realized he had created more than just a business. He had created a movement. Young men who were once ignored or laughed at now had skills, income, and hope for the future. And while he had expanded to multiple states, he still remembered the long nights under Uche's shop, the hunger, and the loneliness that had sharpened his resolve. Ibuka often smiled when he heard someone whisper, "I heard about him. He's unstoppable." That boy, once overlooked, had become a symbol of what determination, skill, and kindness could achieve. The world was noticing, the government was supporting, and those who doubted him now had no choice but to respect the name that had quietly become powerful, Ibuka Okafor. Ibuka had not been back home for over 3 years. When he finally decided to return to Anambra, it wasn't on a motorcycle or bus like before. He arrived in a convoy of branded vans, each carrying his company's logo, eConnect Repairs, shining brightly in the sun. The neighbors who once ignored him now stopped in their tracks, mouths open, staring at the fleet that rolled into the compound. Whispers of disbelief and admiration spread instantly. "Is that really him? I can't believe it's Ibuka." Inside the compound, his family was frozen. His father, Mr. Okafor, stood near the gate, his hands trembling. He stared at Ibuka, at the new car and the vans, at the confident young man who had once been called lazy and useless. Finally, his voice broke, shaky and uncertain. "Ibuka, is this all yours?" Ibuka looked at his father, the words of insult and mockery flashing through his mind, but he didn't answer. Instead, he nodded quietly, letting the silence speak louder than any argument. His eyes scanned the compound. The same walls that had made him feel invisible now echoed with admiration from neighbors and friends who had come to see him. His siblings crowded around, mouths slightly open, unsure whether to hug him, congratulate him, or hide their shame. Even Chima, the eldest brother who had always been the family's pride, looked at him with awe, unsure how to react. The same compound where Ibuka had been dismissed, laughed at, and ignored now celebrated him. His mother's hands trembled as she reached for him, tears filling her eyes. "My son," she whispered, almost breaking under the weight of pride and regret. Ibuka walked slowly through the compound, each step echoing with the memories of hurt, of rejection, of the nights he had spent hungry and alone. Yet now, the compound that once shut him out welcomed him like a hero. Neighbors called out his name, praising his achievement, marveling at how far he had come. The boy who once carried borrowed tools and dreams in his pocket had returned not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a living testament that hard work and belief in oneself could silence even the harshest critics. Ibuka smiled faintly, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and calm. He didn't need to prove anything with words. The sight of his success, the respect in their eyes, and the buzzing excitement in the compound said it all. The boy they had ignored had come back, and this time he was unstoppable. The same people who once laughed at Ibuka now stood nervously outside the gates of his mansion. His family, neighbors, even distant relatives, all lined up, asking for jobs, favors, and help. The irony was sweet. Those who once dismissed him as lazy and useless now looked up at him with hope and a little fear, unsure if he would remember all their harsh words. Chima, his older brother who had always been the pride of the family, stood at the front of the line, unemployed and humbled, waiting for advice from the very brother he had once mocked. Ibuka didn't raise his voice, he didn't scold, and he didn't let pride control him. Instead, he greeted them with calm dignity. He handed Chima contacts for training programs, introduced his mother to a small business initiative, and quietly offered jobs to cousins who had never believed he could succeed. Every gesture was measured, every word intentional. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was showing that success didn't have to be cruel, even when life had been unfair to him. As he stepped aside to speak with his assistant, he said quietly, "Kindness doesn't forget the pain. It just chooses peace." His assistant nodded, understanding that Ibuka's generosity was not weakness, but strength forged from years of struggle, rejection, and determination. He had transformed all the hurt into fuel for his actions, showing that the best victories are not just about money or fame, but about rising above bitterness. Watching this, his father, Mr. Okafor, finally let his tears flow. He had always been harsh, always pushing Chima as the standard, never believing in Ibuka. And now, standing before the man he once thought would never amount to anything, he whispered with trembling voice, "You proved me wrong, son." Ibuka nodded, not needing to speak. The acknowledgement in his father's eyes, the quiet respect, and the recognition of years of unseen struggle were more satisfying than any applause or headline could ever be. Outside, neighbors whispered, "This is the boy they rejected," marveling at his composure and success. The poetic justice was clear. The boy who had been ignored, laughed at, and doubted had risen to heights they never imagined. And he did it not through anger or revenge, but through resilience, skill, and the quiet power of forgiveness. Ibuka had turned rejection into triumph, and his family and community could no longer ignore the man he had become. That Ibuka's success wasn't just about money or fame. He wanted to give back to the people who had shaped him, even those who had doubted him. He began quietly funding his siblings' education, paying for courses, workshops, and books that would help them build careers of their own. He repaired his parents' old house, painting the walls bright, fixing the broken windows, and restoring the garden where he had once sat dreaming under the mango tree. Every corner of the home now reflected care, respect, and the success that had been hard-earned. But Ibuka's vision went beyond his family. He wanted to help other young people in his village who had been overlooked, called failures, or told they wouldn't amount to anything. With the help of his business partners, he opened a youth training center, a place where anyone could learn phone and gadget repair, business skills, and the importance of perseverance. On the day of the opening, the center was packed. Young men and women filled the rooms, excited and nervous, eager to start learning. Ibuka stood at the front, looking at the crowd with calm confidence. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every struggle he had endured. "If your family doesn't believe in you, believe in yourself harder," he said. The crowd erupted in applause, some wiping tears from their eyes, others nodding in quiet determination. He saw hope in their faces, the same hope that had carried him through years of struggle, insults, and hunger. His father, Mr. Okafor, stood near the back, tears streaming down his face for the first time. The weight of regret and pride mixed in his expression. Slowly he stepped forward and whispered, "Son, I'm sorry. Forgive me." Ibuka didn't hesitate. He hugged his father tightly, feeling the tension of years of doubt and disappointment melt away. "You taught me to fight," he said softly. "Just not in the way you expected." The crowd watched, inspired by the quiet reconciliation. Ibuka had not only redeemed himself, but had also created a cycle of hope for others. That day, The training center became more than a building. It became a symbol of resilience, forgiveness, and the power of believing in oneself when no one else will. Ibuka had transformed his pain into purpose, showing that true victory is not only in success but in lifting others as you rise. Ibuka stood at the gate of his mansion, the sun casting a warm glow over the sprawling driveway and the rows of branded vans that bore his company's logo. He watched as young men and women, some timid, some wide-eyed with excitement, walked through the gates toward the training center he had built in his village. Each step they took reminded him of the long nights he had spent under Uche's shop, the hunger he endured, and the endless hours of work that no one believed would lead anywhere. He smiled softly, feeling a quiet pride. "This gate used to close me out," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. "Now it opens for others." The words carried a weight of years of struggle, pain, and perseverance. He watched as the youth entered the center with notebooks and tools, their eyes shining with hope and curiosity. Some looked uncertain, unsure if they could achieve anything, just like he once had been. Yet, as they passed under the gates that had once symbolized rejection, they were stepping into possibilities, into a future Ibuka had fought to make real. He thought about the people who had doubted him, his family, his neighbors, even his own self-doubt during the darkest nights. They had all once said he'd never be anything. But now those very same voices, if they remembered him at all, would only know respect. The irony was powerful. Yet Ibuka felt no malice. He had transformed every insult, every doubt, and every rejection into fuel that lifted not only himself, but an entire generation of young people. His heart swelled as he whispered again, this time aloud. "They said I'd never be anything. Now they line up to learn from the boy they once threw away." The young men laughed nervously, greeted one another, and entered the center, unaware that they were witnessing the legacy of someone who had turned pain into purpose. As the camera, or in imagination the scene, pulled back, the screen faded with a single line. "Don't argue with disbelief. Let your success be the loudest reply." Ibuka's story was no longer just about him. It was about resilience, hope, and the power of believing in oneself when the world refuses to. The gates that had once shut him out now welcomed those who dared to dream. And through them his legacy would continue, opening doors for many more who would one day say, "If he could do it, so can I."